Listen, that sound, sharp metallic echoing through steel, is the heartbeat of fear itself. 80 men trapped inside a steel coffin, holding their breath as the ocean presses down on them with the weight of 1,000 tons. Ping, ping, ping. Each note of sonar is a whisper from death. I see you. This is the moment when silence becomes a weapon, when courage is measured not by shouting, but by staying still in the dark. And yet, somewhere in that darkness, one man decides to do the unthinkable, to stop running, to hunt the hunter. In the endless blue graveyard of the Pacific, during World War II, a single submarine will rewrite every rule of survival. Its captain will turn fear into fury, and the hunted will become the legend. This is the story of the destroyer killer in the summer of 1944. The war in the Pacific had reached a fever pitch. Japan's empire stretched across thousands of miles of ocean, its destroyers prowling like wolves for any hint of an American submarine. Beneath those waves, unseen and uncelebrated, small steel boats carried the war on their shoulders, 80 men each, navigating through silence, darkness, and the promise of death. They were ghosts of World War II, fighting battles that no one on land would ever see. Among those ghosts was one name that would echo forever: the USS Harder. 311 feet of black steel, armed with 10 torpedo tubes and a soul carved out of defiance. At her helm stood Commander Samuel David Dealey, a quiet Texan with a calm voice and an unshakable will. He didn't just command his submarine, he transformed it into an extension of his own mind, cold, calculating, and utterly fearless. For every other submarine commander, the rule was simple: dive deep and stay hidden when destroyers appear. But Dealey's rule was different: attack always. He believed that victory favored the one who struck first, that fear was the enemy's greatest ally. And so, when the hunter appeared on the horizon, he did not dive. He turned toward it. In those moments, beneath miles of crushing water, he found something purer than survival. He found clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when death is certain and defiance is the only prayer left to say. The sea remembers men like him, because when a man dares to hunt death itself, the ocean does not forget. Inside the depths of the Pacific, sunlight is a myth. Down there, the sea turns black and heavy, swallowing every sound, every breath. It's a world of pressure, of confinement, a place where steel is both armor and prison. And in that narrow space between survival and collapse lives the heartbeat of a machine called the USS Harder. She was 311 feet long, but inside, she felt smaller than a tomb. Every inch was filled with the hum of engines, the hiss of air compressors, the tang of oil, and the sweat of 80 men who hadn't seen the sun in days. The corridors were so tight that 2 men could not pass without brushing shoulders. The air was thick with diesel and fear, a taste that never left the back of your throat. The crew called her the Beast, half with affection, half with reverence, because she protected them and she could kill them just as easily. The submarine was a paradox. She was built to disappear, to become invisible, to hide beneath the waves, yet her true power lay in aggression, in striking first and vanishing into the silence afterward. Her 10 torpedo tubes were her teeth, her periscope, her single unblinking eye. Her engines, 4 roaring diesels, gave her a pulse like a living creature. To those who served inside her, she was not metal. She was alive, and her soul was a man named Samuel David Dealey. Dealey was not what people imagined when they thought of heroes. He was not loud. He didn't bark orders or pound his fist on the table. He spoke quietly, with a calm that could cut through panic like a scalpel. Born in Texas, raised on open land and long silences, he carried that stillness into the chaos of war. His crew said you could tell what kind of day it was by the look in his eyes, steady gray when things were normal, burning silver when it was time to fight. He wasn't fearless. No man who sails beneath the sea is, but he had something rarer: control. When others froze, Dealey thought faster. When others hesitated, he acted. He had a gift for reading the rhythm of battle the way a musician reads a score. Every sonar ping, every turn of a propeller, every hiss of ballast air was part of the same song. And Dealey knew how to play it. The crew adored him, though few ever said it out loud. They didn't have to. You could see it in the way they moved when his voice came over the intercom. Steady, sure, without question. Under his command, hesitation was a sin. Fear was a distraction. The only thing that mattered was precision, discipline, and the next target. The Harder became more than a submarine. It became a reflection of his will. He trained them like a conductor shaping an orchestra. Every drill was a symphony of timing. Battle stations, flood tubes 1 through 6, rig for dive. Each command was a note, and when they struck together, the result was harmony. In those moments, the crew didn't feel trapped in a steel coffin. They felt invincible. Dealey taught them something that few men ever learn, that courage isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the steady hand on the periscope when a destroyer bears down at full speed. It's the breath you don't take when the sonar pings get closer. It's the heartbeat that doesn't speed up even when death is 5 seconds away. When Dealey walked through the submarine, men stood a little straighter. He didn't demand it. He inspired it. He was both captain and confessor, mentor and executioner. He had turned his boat into a religion, and its gospel was simple: attack always. But this wasn't recklessness. It was a philosophy born from experience. He had seen what hesitation cost, the lives of other submariners who dove too soon, who hid when they could have struck. Dealey believed that the ocean didn't reward fear. It rewarded fury. Because beneath the waves, hesitation was death. At night, when the lights dimmed and the engines settled into their steady growl, the men would lie in their bunks, the metal hull vibrating under their backs. Sometimes they would hear him pacing quietly through the control room, his boots thudding softly against the deck. They said he never really slept. He was always listening, to the boat, to the sea, to the silence. He could sense when something was coming before the instruments showed it. Some men called it instinct. Others called it something closer to sorcery. In the mess hall, between shifts, they told stories about him. How he once took on 3 destroyers at once and came back laughing. How he had a scar across his hand from a jammed torpedo latch, but never wore gloves. Said he needed to feel the steel to trust it. They spoke his name with the reverence usually reserved for saints or madmen. And in truth, Dealey was both. He was the kind of man the sea either kills or crowns. And for a brief burning moment in history, it seemed like the ocean itself bowed to him. The USS Harder and her captain had become one, a man and a machine fused into a single relentless predator waiting for the next hunt. And the hunt was coming. By early June of 1944, the Pacific had become a chessboard of giants. The American fleet was pushing west, island by island, mile by mile, toward the Japanese homeland. And somewhere ahead, in the steaming blue waters of the Sulu Sea, the Imperial Japanese Navy was gathering for one final stand. Its secret anchorage was a place few outside the Navy had ever heard of. Tawi-Tawi. A name whispered among submariners like a curse. It was the heart of the beast. There, anchored in quiet bays under the burning tropical sun, waited the pride of Japan's fleet. The massive carriers Taiho, Shokaku, Zuikaku, the titanic battleships Yamato and Musashi, and circling them like wolves were dozens of destroyers, their sonar crews listening for the faintest echo of an intruder. The sea itself was alive with danger. Reefs, shifting currents, enemy patrols. No sane submarine commander would ever go near it. Samuel Dealey was not a sane man. He was a believer, and the gospel he preached was simple. Hit him harder. The Harder's orders were officially reconnaissance. She was to patrol the channels leading out of Tawi-Tawi and report any movement of the Japanese fleet. One coded message could change the course of the war. It would tell Admiral Raymond Spruance that Japan's carriers were on the move and that the greatest naval battle of World War II was about to begin. But for Dealey, observe was just another word for hunt. The journey north from Fremantle was a descent into another world. Each day, the water grew warmer, shallower, more treacherous. The men slept beside torpedoes and awoke to the sound of sonar drills and the hiss of air vents. They sweated through their uniforms. They talked less. The jokes in the mess hall died away, replaced by quiet routine. Even laughter sounded out of place, too loud, too alive. The crew knew what awaited them. They had all seen the map, a red circle drawn around the enemy's lair. It was like being sent into the lion's den, armed only with your heartbeat. On the night of June 6th, while half a world away Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, the Harder prowled the dark waters off the Philippines. The sea was ink black. The sky was starless. The submarine moved silently at periscope depth, her engines throttled down to a whisper. In the control room, every man listened for the one sound that could mean life or death, the pulse of propellers. Then, just after midnight, it came. High-speed screws bearing 090. The words shot through the boat like a spark through dry tinder. Instantly, men moved to stations. Hatches clanged shut. The atmosphere changed from boredom to war in the space of a breath. At the periscope, Dealey rose like a ghost. He saw it, a destroyer slicing through the night, a dagger of light in motion against the horizon. A normal captain would have ordered a dive. Dealey did not. He whispered two words that sent a chill through every man aboard. Battle surface. In that instant, the submarine transformed. Compressed air thundered into the ballast tanks. The bow rose. Water streamed from her decks. She burst from the ocean like something alive and furious. The diesel engines roared to life, shaking the hull. Men scrambled onto the bridge, the wind slapping their faces. Ahead, the Japanese destroyer Minazuki was closing fast. "Flood tubes 1, 2, 3, Dealey ordered. His voice was calm, deliberate, as though reading from a prayer book. The torpedo room came alive. Hands moved over levers and dials. Torpedoes were loaded, gyro set. The target crossed the wire in the periscope. Final bearing and shoot. 3 torpedoes leapt from the Harder's bow, streaking toward the destroyer in invisible fury. Left full rudder. Dive! The submarine turned hard and slid beneath the surface, the sea closing above her like a lid. Seconds passed, 10, 20, 30, each one a lifetime. Then came the sound, a deep, rolling explosion that punched through the hull, followed by another. The Minazuki was gone, torn apart, sinking fast. In the control room, men exhaled for the first time in minutes. Some cheered, others wept quietly. They had stared death in the face and fired first. The first kill off Tawi-Tawi was complete. But victory in the deep is never silent. The Japanese fleet now knew a ghost was among them. Destroyers swarmed the waters, their sonar pings hammering through the sea like fists. Every contact, every oil slick, every sound could be the Harder. The hunt was on. The next afternoon, Dealey found his second prey. Through the periscope shimmered another destroyer, Hayanami, zigzagging, searching. Her sonar was active, sweeping for the American Phantom. The smart move was to go deep and wait. Dealey didn't believe in waiting. He let Hayanami come closer, tracking her with deadly calm. Every few seconds, the periscope rose and fell, a single silver flash in the waves. Range, 3,000 yards. Angle on the bow, 30 starboard. Final bearing and fire. 3 torpedoes raced upward. A minute later, the ocean exploded. One of the torpedoes struck Hayanami dead on. The destroyer's bow lifted, shattered, then folded into itself, vanishing beneath the sea. Another hunter had become prey. 2 destroyers in 24 hours. The men of the Harder felt it now, something electric, almost supernatural. They weren't running anymore. They were chasing. The predator of the deep had found its purpose. Word spread through the Japanese fleet like wildfire. There was talk of a demon submarine, one that attacked destroyers instead of fleeing them. The Harder had become a legend in real time, and the enemy was terrified. For Dealey and his crew, it was only the beginning. They had entered the dragon's lair, and they were just getting started. There are moments in war when the line between courage and madness disappears, when survival itself becomes an act of defiance. For Samuel Dealey, that line was not something to be avoided. It was something to be crossed, over and over again. To understand what made the Harder different, you have to understand Dealey's doctrine. He did not see the ocean as a place of hiding. He saw it as an arena. He believed that a submarine was not a ghost, but a gladiator, built to strike, not to vanish. And at the center of his philosophy was one terrifying maneuver, the down-the-throat shot. In submarine warfare, the safe way to attack is from the side, the beam shot. It gives the largest target profile and the best chance to survive. But Dealey didn't want safety. He wanted certainty. He would face the destroyer head-on, let it charge toward him at full speed, and then fire directly into its bow, the narrowest, most dangerous target imaginable. A window of seconds. If he missed, the destroyer would be on top of him, dropping depth charges into his coffin. If he hit, the explosion would tear the ship apart. Other captains called it suicide. Dealey called it math. He understood angles, distance, speed. He could read the destroyer's movements the way a hunter reads the heartbeat of his prey. To him, the down-the-throat shot wasn't recklessness. It was geometry, precision, and nerve, the purest form of warfare. But what truly set Dealey apart wasn't the tactic. It was the psychology behind it. He knew that every destroyer captain believed himself the hunter. Charging headlong at a submarine was an act of dominance. To have that prey suddenly turn and attack, to see torpedoes streaking straight toward your bridge, it shattered the mind before it shattered the ship. It reversed the hierarchy of fear. Dealey weaponized that reversal. Each kill didn't just sink steel, it infected the enemy with terror. Destroyer captains began to hesitate, began to doubt their instincts. And in submarine warfare, hesitation is fatal. In a sense, Dealey wasn't just fighting ships, he was rewriting the predator's mind. Inside the Harder, this philosophy became faith. Men spoke about it the way priests speak about scripture. When the sonar pinged, they didn't hear danger anymore, they heard opportunity. When the destroyer charged, they smiled grimly, because it meant the hunt had begun. Dealey's calm voice over the intercom was their prayer. Standby tubes 1 through 6, range 1,000 yards, fire. He didn't need to shout. His tone carried the authority of inevitability. Every man aboard believed that if they followed his rhythm, they would live. That belief became their armor. What Dealey had done, perhaps without even realizing it, was transform warfare into psychology. He stripped fear of its power by redefining it. Fear wasn't the signal to run, it was the signal to act. He had turned terror itself into a compass. Some said his confidence was supernatural. Others said it was contagious. The truth lay somewhere between. Confidence, when absolute, changes the world around it. Dealey's certainty infected steel, spread through cables and circuits, into the hearts of the men who worked the dive planes and the torpedo tubes. They mirrored his calm. They borrowed his faith. And together, they became something greater than any machine, a collective will sharpened to a single point. There were nights when the Harder lay silently in the deep, surrounded by enemy destroyers, sonar pings striking her hull like hammer blows. In another boat, men might pray, curse, or break. On the Harder, they waited, their breathing slow, their hands steady. They had been taught that panic wastes oxygen and hesitation wastes life. So they listened, to the sea, to the captain's voice, to the rhythm of war itself. Then came the command that every man lived for: battle stations. It wasn't just an order, it was a release, a letting go of fear, a moment when every man aboard stopped being human and became a part of the machine. Dealey didn't invent courage, he engineered it, he built it into his boat, into his crew, into the doctrine of the Harder. He took a weapon of stealth and turned it into a weapon of wrath, and that wrath was about to collide head-on with the Empire of Japan. The Harder had already sunk 2 destroyers, but the ocean was far from finished testing its faith. The next days would bring something even greater, a confrontation so impossible, so violent, that it would seal their legend forever. The sea was sharpening its blade. The hunters were closing in, and Samuel Dealey was ready to meet them, face to face. By the morning of June 9, 1944, the waters off Tawi-Tawi were no longer just hostile, they were hunting grounds. Japanese patrol planes swept low across the sea, destroyers prowled in packs, their sonar echoing through the depths like church bells tolling for the dead. Every man aboard the Harder knew the truth. They were being hunted. The tension inside the submarine was suffocating. The air was stale and heavy. The temperature in the control room climbed past 100 degrees. Men worked stripped to their waists, their faces slick with sweat, their hands black with grease. Every ping of sonar reverberated through the steel hull, sharp and merciless. Ping. "We hear you," it seemed to say. Ping. "You're going to die down here." But in the conning tower, Samuel Dealey was calm. His eyes were steady, his voice quiet, his movements deliberate. He had lived for this kind of pressure. He was not going to hide from it. He was going to shape it. Just before noon, the Harder surfaced briefly to recharge batteries. The ocean shimmered under a brutal tropical sun. The horizon looked clean. Then, the cry from the lookout. "Aircraft! Aircraft! Dead ahead!" Dealey didn't hesitate. "Crash dive!" The klaxon blared, and the submarine plunged beneath the waves. Water poured over the deck as the boat descended into darkness. But the Japanese pilot had already seen them. A radio transmission went out. Somewhere above, the hunters began to converge. Minutes later, the hydrophone operator stiffened. "2 sets of high-speed screws, sir, closing fast, port and starboard. 2 destroyers, a classic pincer." Dealey's mind clicked through the math. Shallow water, no depth to hide. Enemy air support, no chance to surface. There was nowhere to run. Most captains would have tried to vanish, sinking low and silent, hoping to outlast the hunt. But Dealey knew better. In shallow seas, hiding only delayed the inevitable. He was not going to wait for death. He was going to meet it head-on. "Battle stations, torpedo," he ordered. The 2 destroyers were Tanakaze and Hayanami's sister ship, veteran killers. Their sonar pings grew faster, closer, hammering the Harder's hull. The crew could now feel the sound in their bones. The control room lights dimmed. Sweat dripped onto the deck plates. Dealey's face was pale but serene. He was listening, counting, timing. The first destroyer thundered overhead. The sound of its propellers was deafening, a deep metallic roar that shook the entire boat. The men braced themselves, jaws clenched. Depth charges exploded above and around them, crushing the water like thunderclaps. The hull creaked and groaned, rivets screaming in protest. One more direct hit, and they would be peeled open like a tin can. Dealey waited. And then, when the roar of the destroyer's engines began to fade, he struck. Up scope. The periscope broke the surface for only a second. In that heartbeat, Dealey saw it, the stern of the Tanakaze, moving away, broad and perfect. Downscope, final bearing, fire 7. A single torpedo roared from the aft tube, slicing through the water. Seconds later, a colossal explosion tore the sea apart. The concussion slammed into the Harder, rattling the lights, knocking men off their feet. When Dealey raised the scope again, he saw chaos, flames, wreckage, the Japanese destroyer breaking in 2. The hunter was dead. But there was no time to celebrate. The second destroyer had seen it happen. It turned toward the Harder, full speed, guns blazing, its bow cutting through the waves like a blade. The sonar pings merged into a single shrill note, a scream of vengeance. The Harder was trapped. "Stand by forward tubes," Dealey ordered. "Range, closing fast." Inside the torpedo room, men moved like machines, sweat dripping from their elbows, the hiss of compressed air filling the narrow space. The rangefinder spun faster and faster, 2,000 yards, 1,500, 1,000. The destroyer filled the periscope view, a mountain of gray steel and white spray. Dealey could see the faces of men on its bridge. He didn't blink. "Final bearing! Fire 1! Fire 2! Fire 3! 3 torpedoes streaked toward the oncoming destroyer. "Dive! Dive!" The Harder angled down, straining for every foot of depth it could find. They didn't have long to wait. The explosion that followed was not a sound. It was a physical event, a violent, world-shaking concussion that ripped through the ocean, slamming the Harder like a hand from God. Lights shattered. Men were thrown to the deck. And then, silence. Real silence. No sonar, no propellers, no enemy. The hydrophone operator pressed his headphones tight, listening. Then he looked up, his voice trembling. "He's gone, Captain. I hear him breaking up." 2 destroyers, 2 hunters, destroyed in less than 5 minutes. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a sound began to spread through the submarine. Not cheers, something deeper. A low, stunned laughter of disbelief and relief, rising and falling like waves. They had done the impossible. They had killed death itself. When the Harder surfaced that night, The air above the sea felt different, quieter, as if even the ocean was in awe. They sent their coded message to Admiral Spruance: enemy fleet departing Tawi-Tawi. That message would trigger the deployment of the U.S. carriers toward the Marianas, setting the stage for the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the greatest carrier battle of World War II. The next days passed in a strange calm. The Harder had survived its baptism of fire. It had earned its legend, the Destroyer Killer. 5 days, 4 kills. A record that defied belief, but the war was not over, and neither was their destiny. The sea, they say, keeps its promises, and it remembers every name written in Syrian blood. Samuel Daly's name was now carved deep in its heart, and the ocean was not done with him yet. The ocean is a patient storyteller. It remembers every scream, every explosion, every prayer whispered into its depths. And though it buries its dead in silence, it never forgets their names. For the USS Harder, the sea's memory was both cradle and coffin. 2 months after the legendary 5th patrol, the 6 days that made them immortal, Dealey and his men set out again. It was August 1944, and the Pacific War was at its turning point. American fleets were advancing, Japanese convoys retreating, and the waters around the Philippines had become a graveyard of wreckage and oil. Yet, once again, the Harder was ordered to dive into the fire. This was their 6th patrol, the last they would ever make. Dealey was at the height of his powers, decorated, revered, and now considered the Navy's deadliest submarine commander. He could have accepted a desk job, training new crews. But that was never who he was. He was a man who belonged at sea, where decisions were made in seconds, and history was written in the space between sonar pings. The Harder left Fremantle quietly, without ceremony. The crew knew what it meant. Veterans all, they had stared death in the face and survived. But there was something different this time. The laughter was quieter, the silences longer. They all felt it, the weight of destiny closing in like the pressure of the ocean itself. Their orders were simple: patrol the waters off Luzon, strike enemy convoys, and coordinate with another American submarine, the USS Harder. Together, they would hunt Japanese shipping lanes, an operation sailors called wolf-pack warfare. But Dealey was no longer just hunting ships. He was chasing perfection. The spirit that had driven him to attack destroyers now pulled him deeper, closer to danger. To the crew, it felt as though the Harder had become restless, as if the boat itself wanted one final test. On August 22nd, they attacked a Japanese convoy, crippling multiple ships. On August 23rd, they joined the Harder to sink 2 more escort vessels. Their legend was still growing, even as fate circled above. And then came the morning of August 24th. The sea was calm, unnaturally calm. The Harder and the Harder tracked another enemy target, a small Japanese escort ship designated CD-22. The Harder fired first, launching a spread of torpedoes before diving deep. Moments later, a chain of explosions rumbled through the water. Then, a new sound, depth charges, 12, 24, more. The sea convulsed with violence. Through the hydrophones, the Harder's sonar operator heard the explosions fade, and then silence. They waited for the Harder's signal. None came. They called her name across the frequencies. No reply. The Harder was gone. Post-war records would later reveal the truth. The CD-22 had detected the American submarine at periscope depth. A single, perfectly placed string of depth charges detonated just above her. The hull imploded under the pressure. The men never had a chance. In a heartbeat, the ocean claimed them all. Samuel Daly and his 80 crewmen, entombed forever inside their steel tomb, resting now at the bottom of the South China Sea. No distress call, no survivors, only silence. When word reached Fremantle, the news spread through the submarine base like a chill wind. Men who had served with Dealey refused to believe it. "How can the Harder be dead?" they said. "She was untouchable." But even legends bleed. The Navy waited weeks before confirming the loss. And when they did, the announcement was short, almost clinical. USS Harder, SS-257, overdue from patrol. Presumed lost with all hands. There were no funerals, No flags folded over coffins, only the empty sea. But the sea itself held a memorial. For months afterward, sailors crossing that part of the South China Sea reported strange sounds over the sonar, faint metallic echoes like a heartbeat beneath the waves. They called it the ghost of Tawi-Tawi. Superstition, perhaps, or maybe the ocean telling its story. For his actions during that final impossible patrol, Samuel David Dealey was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest decoration. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." It was the language of heroism, but it could never capture the truth, because Dealey's greatest act wasn't killing the enemy. It was teaching men how to face death without blinking. Today, the USS Harder rests more than 3,000 feet below the surface, a monument of steel and silence. Her hull lies intact, her torpedo tube still closed, her name still etched into the brass plate on her conning tower. She is not forgotten. She never will be. Every submarine that sails today sails in her shadow. Every captain who hears the echo of sonar through his hull carries a piece of Dealey's legacy, the belief that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. The sea has many graves, but only a few legends, and among them, one name stands apart: USS Harder, the destroyer killer, the wolf of the deep, the ghost of Tawi-Tawi. The ocean is a patient storyteller. It remembers every scream, every explosion, every prayer whispered into its depths, and though it buries its dead in silence, it never forgets their names. For the USS Harder, the sea's memory was both cradle and coffin. 2 months after the legendary 5th patrol, the 6 days that made them immortal, Dealey and his men set out again. It was August 1944, and the Pacific War was at its turning point. American fleets were advancing, Japanese convoys retreating, and the waters around the Philippines had become a graveyard of wreckage and oil. Yet once again, the Harder was ordered to dive into the fire. This was their 6th patrol, the last they would ever make. Dealey was at the height of his powers, decorated, revered, and now considered the Navy's deadliest submarine commander. He could have accepted a desk job, training new crews. But that was never who he was. He was a man who belonged at sea, where decisions were made in seconds and history was written in the space between sonar pings. The Harder left Fremantle quietly, without ceremony. The crew knew what it meant. Veterans all, they had stared death in the face and survived. But there was something different this time. The laughter was quieter, the silences longer. They all felt it, the weight of destiny closing in, like the pressure of the ocean itself. Their orders were simple: patrol the waters off Luzon, strike enemy convoys, and coordinate with another American submarine, the USS Harder. Together, they would hunt Japanese shipping lanes, an operation sailors called wolf pack warfare. But Dealey was no longer just hunting ships. He was chasing perfection. The spirit that had driven him to attack destroyers now pulled him deeper, closer to danger. To the crew, it felt as though the Harder had become restless, as if the boat itself wanted one final test. On August 22nd, they attacked a Japanese convoy, crippling multiple ships. On August 23rd, they joined the Harder to sink 2 more escort vessels. Their legend was still growing, even as fate circled above. And then came the morning of August 24th. The sea was calm, unnaturally calm. The Harder and the Harder tracked another enemy target, a small Japanese escort ship designated CD-22. The Harder fired first, launching a spread of torpedoes before diving deep. Moments later, a chain of explosions rumbled through the water. Then, a new sound, depth charges, 12, 24, more. The sea convulsed with violence. Through the hydrophones, the Harder's sonar operator heard the explosions fade, and then silence. They waited for the Harder's signal. None came. They called her name across the frequencies. No reply. The Harder was gone. Post-war records would later reveal the truth. The CD-22 had detected the American submarine at periscope depth. A single, perfectly placed string of depth charges detonated just above her. The hull imploded under the pressure. The men never had a chance. In a heartbeat, the ocean claimed them all, Samuel Dealey and his 80 crewmen, entombed forever inside their steel tomb, resting now at the bottom of the South China Sea. No distress call, no survivors, only silence. When word reached Fremantle, the news spread through the submarine base like a chill wind. Men who had served with Dealey refused to believe it. "How can the Harder be dead?" they said. "She was untouchable." But even legends bleed. The Navy waited weeks before confirming the loss. And when they did, the announcement was short, almost clinical. USS Harder, SS-257, overdue from patrol. Presumed lost with all hands. There were no funerals, no flags folded over coffins, only the empty sea. But the sea itself held a memorial. For months afterward, sailors crossing that part of the South China Sea reported strange sounds over the sonar, faint metallic echoes like a heartbeat beneath the waves. They called it the ghost of Tawi-Tawi. Superstition, perhaps, or maybe the ocean telling its story. For his actions during that final impossible patrol, Samuel David Dealey was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest decoration. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." It was the language of heroism, but it could never capture the truth. Because Dealey's greatest act wasn't killing the enemy. It was teaching men how to face death without blinking. Today, the USS Harder rests more than 3,000 feet below the surface, a monument of steel and silence. Her hull lies intact, her torpedo tubes still closed, her name still etched into the brass plate on her conning tower. She is not forgotten. She never will be. Every submarine that sails today sails in her shadow. Every captain who hears the echo of sonar through his hull carries a piece of Dealey's legacy. The belief that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. The sea has many graves, but only a few legends. And among them, one name stands apart. USS Harder, the destroyer killer, the wolf of the deep, the ghost of Tawi-Tawi.